Admiral Corvin Thale watched through the reinforced viewport as 18,000 hegemony vessels materialized from quantum slipspace, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing like infected wounds against the star field. Each ship was a living nightmare, organic. Architecture that breathed, bled, and hungered. The smallest dreadnought dwarfed humanity's largest battlecruiser by a factor of 10. "Sir, their fleet composition is unprecedented," reported Lieutenant Commander Nix Voss from the tactical station, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We're reading massive energy signatures from their primary vessels. Each one could glass a continent." The bridge of the UES Sovereign's Edge fell silent. Around them, humanity's third defense fleet, 300 ships representing the last organized resistance, seemed pitifully small. Captain Dorian Kress of the Thunderbolt had already transmitted his final message to Earth. "Tell our children we tried." But Thale didn't share the despair creeping through the comm channels. His weathered face, scarred from the Proxima Station massacre, remained impassive. 40 years of service had taught him that sometimes the universe demanded the impossible, and humanity had a peculiar talent for delivering it. "Commodore Reyna Vex, report from the Research Division," came a transmission from the experimental vessel Paradox Breaker. Her voice carried something the others lacked: anticipation. "The field generators are online, Admiral. All ships report. Successful installation of the new drive systems. We're ready to demonstrate why the hegemony should have left us alone." The enemy fleet began its approach, tentacles of plasma energy already extending between vessels like neural networks. The hegemony fought as a single organism, each ship a nerve ending in a vast, malevolent intelligence that had consumed 17 civilizations. Their bioweapons could rewrite DNA at the molecular level, turning defenders into mindless thralls. Within minutes, "Sir," Communications Officer Zara Fung interrupted. "Incoming transmission from the hegemony flagship. They're offering terms." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the grotesque form of War Master Velthak, part crustacean, part machine, wholly alien. Its voice bubbled through translators like acid through metal. "Primitive mammals, your pathetic resistance ends now. Submit to absorption, and your species will serve the greater organism. Resist, and we shall strip the flesh from your bones and wear your skins as victory banners." Thale leaned forward in his command chair, a ghost of a smile playing at his lips. "Tell the War Master that humanity appreciates the offer, but we have a counter-proposal." The alien's compound eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "We're going to show you why evolution favored the predators with 2 legs, 2 arms, and very bad tempers," Thale continued. "All ships, initiate Protocol Absolute Zero. Let's remind these bioengineered nightmares what happens when you threaten a human's cubs." The transformation began immediately. Every human vessel suddenly blazed with energy signatures that shouldn't exist, power levels that made the hegemony's dreadnoughts look like children's toys. The space between the fleets shimmered as reality itself began to bend. War Master Velthak's confident posture faltered. "Impossible. No species developed such technology without centuries of Warzone engaged," Thale announced calmly. "Weapons free. Show them what desperate humans can accomplish in 18 months. The first salvo from humanity's fleet defied every known law of physics." Captain Lysander Cruz aboard the destroyer Nemesis Dawn watched his targeting computer struggle to process what it was seeing. The quantum torpedoes his ship had just fired weren't traveling through space. They were rewriting the fundamental structure of reality around the hegemony vessels, causing sections of enemy dreadnoughts to simply cease existing. "Admiral, the enemy is attempting evasive maneuvers," reported Commander Elena Vasquez from the battlecruiser Iron Testament. "But their bioships can't adapt fast enough. They're designed for conventional physics. Warmaster Velthak's image flickered with interference as his flagship's organic hull began to buckle under gravitational distortions that materialized from nowhere. What sorcery is this? Your species barely achieved faster-than-light travel. When we began monitoring you, Commodore Vex's laughter echoed across the fleet channels. That's where you made your first mistake, slug. You assumed we were trying to catch up to you. We weren't. We were trying to lap you. The truth was almost too audacious to believe. When the hegemony had revealed themselves 18 months ago with the destruction of Kepler Station, humanity's greatest minds hadn't attempted to match their biotechnology. Instead, they had done what humans did best. They had cheated. Dr. Marcus Holloway, the brilliant madman behind Project Looking Glass, had proposed something unprecedented. Instead of advancing human technology through conventional research, they would steal it from themselves. Using theoretical quantum mechanics and a healthy disregard for causality, they had established communication links with human civilizations from parallel timelines, versions of humanity that had developed along different technological paths. The hegemony exists in most timelines, Dr. Holloway had explained to the emergency session of the Earth Defense Council. But so do versions of us that defeated them. We just need to borrow their homework. The result was the Paradox Fleet. Vessels, equipped with technology from 17 different human civilizations across the quantum multiverse. Ships armed with temporal disruptors from a timeline where humanity had mastered time travel, reality anchors from a dimension where humans had learned to manipulate the fundamental forces of existence, and consciousness bombs from a universe where human psychic potential had evolved beyond imagination. Hegemony vessels are attempting to retreat to slipspace, announced Navigator Kai Okafor from the command ship. Their quantum drives are failing. The reality distortions are preventing clean dimensional transitions. Admiral Thale watched the enemy fleet's desperate attempts to escape with clinical satisfaction. The hegemony's bioships writhed like dying animals as their organic computers struggled to process impossible geometry and causality violations. Target their command nexus, he ordered. Let's have a word with their collective consciousness. The Sovereign's Edge fired a single shot, a pulse of pure possibility that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. It struck the hegemony's central coordination vessel and began unraveling its bio-neural network like pulling threads from a tapestry. For the first time in the war, the hegemony's perfect unity fractured. Individual ships began operating independently, their movements chaotic and uncoordinated as the collective intelligence that bound them started dissolving. "Sir," Voss reported with barely contained excitement, "we're receiving fragmented transmissions from multiple hegemony vessels. They're surrendering. Individually." Warmaster Velthak's image reappeared, but the arrogant predator had been replaced by something approaching panic. "This cannot be. The hegemony has conquered countless species. We are the apex of evolution." "No," Thale replied quietly. "You're the apex of your evolution. We just borrowed ours from better neighbors." The hegemony flagship Devourer of Worlds hung dead in space, its bioluminescent hull flickering like a dying heartbeat. Around it, the once mighty invasion fleet drifted in clusters of confusion, their shared consciousness severed by weapons that attacked the very concept of unity. Captain Miranda Volt of the science vessel Quantum Scalpel transmitted her analysis to the fleet command. "Admiral, we're reading massive psychological trauma across their remaining vessels. It appears the hegemony isn't just a military collective, it's a single distributed organism. By severing their neural links, we've essentially lobotomized them." The irony wasn't lost on Admiral Thale. Humanity's greatest strength, individual thinking, personal initiative, the ability to function independently, had become their most devastating weapon against an enemy that had evolved beyond such primitive concepts. "Commodore Raven Blackthorn reporting from the Void Walker," came another transmission. "We're detecting some kind of emergency beacon from the hegemony command ship. They're calling for help?" Dr. Petra Yankowski, the xenobiologist aboard Thal's flagship, looked up from her readings with troubled eyes. "Sir, I don't think the hegemony are the apex predators they claim to be. These biosignatures, they're not natural evolution. Someone or something created them." Before Thala could respond, space itself began to tear. The rift that opened beyond the crippled hegemony fleet was unlike anything in humanity's stolen databases. It wasn't a portal or a dimensional gateway. It was a wound in reality itself. Bleeding colors that had no names and geometries that hurt to perceive. What emerged defied description. The entities that flowed through the rift were to the hegemony what the hegemony had been to humanity, utterly superior, incomprehensibly advanced, and absolutely terrifying. They moved through space like living thoughts, their forms shifting, between states of matter and energy and something else entirely. "By the void," whispered Commander Alexei Kozlov from the stealth cruiser Shadow's Edge. The hegemony weren't conquerors. They were refugees. The truth hit the human fleet like a physical blow. The bioships that had seemed so alien, so threatening, suddenly appeared fragile and desperate. The hegemony hadn't been expanding across the galaxy out of conquest. They had been running from something far worse, and humanity had just sent up a signal flare, announcing their presence to whatever had been chasing them. One of the entities, if it could be called that, extended what might have been an appendage toward the human fleet. When it spoke, the words bypassed ears entirely and carved themselves directly into consciousness. "Fascinating. Another species capable of paradox manipulation. The hegemony were correct to fear you." Admiral Thale felt his mind struggling to process the communication. Around him, bridge crew members were pressing hands to their temples, blood trickling from several noses. "Sir," Dr. Yankowski gasped, "these beings, they're not from our reality. They're from outside the multiverse entirely. They're feeding on the concept of existence itself." The entity's attention turned fully to humanity's fleet, and Thaley felt the weight of its regard like gravity itself, pressing down on his soul. "You have destroyed our cattle. Inadvertently, perhaps, but the result remains. The hegemony served as efficient harvesters of conscious species. Now that function falls to you." "Like hell it does," Thale growled through gritted teeth. "Resistance is irrelevant. You will serve, or you will be consumed. There is no third option." But as the entity spoke, something interesting happened. The reality distortions generated by humanity's paradox, weapons began to resonate with each other, creating interference patterns that the entities seemed unable to predict or counter. Dr. Holloway's voice crackled through the quantum communicator. "Admiral, I'm reading feedback, loops in their approach vectors. These things are used to dealing with linear reality, but our tech is pulling possibilities from 17 different timelines simultaneously. They can't process that much paradox at once." Thale smiled grimly. "All ships, full paradox deployment. Let's show these cosmic nightmares what happens when you threaten a species that learned to cheat at the universe itself." Reality became a battlefield. The entities, whom Dr. Yankowski had designated void shepherds, attacked not with weapons, but with the fundamental forces of entropy itself. Where they focused their attention, space-time began to decay, matter dissolved into component atoms, and the very concept of existence started to fray at the edges. But humanity's response was equally impossible. Captain Rosa Delgado of the experimental vessel Paradigm Shift watched her instruments register readings that shouldn't exist as her ship's quantum mirror drive activated. Around her, 17 different versions of the Paradigm Shift materialized from parallel timelines, each one equipped with weapons designed by humanity's alternate evolution paths. "This is Paradigm Shift Alpha 7, came a transmission from one of the parallel vessels. "Our timeline's humans developed pure energy manipulation, targeting the Shepherd's dimensional anchor points. Paradigm shift Gamma 12 here, reported another version. We mastered consciousness transfer technology, beginning upload of anti-entropy algorithms directly into their cognitive matrices. The battle that erupted existed on 17 different planes of reality simultaneously. Humanity's Paradox fleet fought with weapons that pulled ammunition from futures that hadn't happened yet, shields that borrowed invulnerability from timelines where they had never been attacked, and tactics that incorporated strategies from wars that would never be fought. The Void Shepherds, for the first time in eons, encountered something they couldn't simply unmake. "Impossible," the lead entity broadcasted, its voice now tinged with something resembling confusion. "Reality cannot sustain such contradictions. The multiverse itself should collapse." "That's where you're wrong," Admiral Thale replied, his flagship now existing in a state of quantum superposition that allowed it to be simultaneously attacking and retreating. "You think in terms of single realities, single possibilities. We learned to think bigger. The truth was that humanity's paradox technology shouldn't have worked. By all known laws of physics, pulling resources from parallel timelines should have created catastrophic causality violations. But Dr. Holloway had discovered something remarkable. The multiverse itself was more resilient than anyone imagined. It could absorb massive paradoxes as long as the end result still followed certain cosmic principles. And the most important principle was that consciousness, thinking beings capable of choice and creativity, had to be preserved. "Sir, Commander," Julian Torres reported from the battleship Reality's Edge, "the Shepherds are attempting to retreat back through their dimensional rift, but our paradox fields are interfering with their exit vectors." The lead Shepherd's form began to fluctuate as 17 different versions of humanity's weapons struck it simultaneously from angles that didn't exist in normal space-time. For beings that fed on the concept of existence itself, being attacked by weapons that pulled their power from non-existence was deeply unsettling. "You cannot defeat us. We are entropy itself. We are the end of all things." "Maybe," Admiral Thale acknowledged, "but we're the species that learned to postpone the inevitable, indefinitely. All ships initiate the consciousness cascade. Let's show them what happens when you threaten a universe full of thinking beings." The consciousness cascade was Dr. Holloway's masterpiece, a weapon that didn't destroy but created. It pulled the collective intelligence, creativity, and will to survive from 17 different versions of humanity and projected it as a weapon of pure possibility. The effect on the Void Shepherds was immediate and catastrophic. Beings that had existed for billions of years by consuming the complexity of conscious life suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by the concentrated creativity of an entire species multiplied across 17 realities. They began to change. Where the cascade touched them, the Shepherds started developing something they had never possessed before: individual identity, personal desires, the capacity for growth rather than mere consumption. It was perhaps the most human victory possible. They had defeated cosmic horrors not by destroying them, but by teaching them to be better. The metamorphosis of the Void Shepherds was unlike anything in recorded cosmic history. Dr. Elena Cortez, the quantum psychologist aboard the research vessel Mind's Eye, watched in fascination as the beings that had once threatened to unmake reality itself began developing individual personalities. Her instruments registered the impossible. Entities of pure entropy learning to create rather than consume. "Admiral," she reported to the fleet command, "the Shepherds are evolving. The consciousness cascade has triggered some kind of developmental phase. They're becoming individuals." The lead Shepherd, who had begun calling itself Inquirer, no longer communicated through mind-searing telepathy, but had developed something approaching normal speech patterns. Its form had stabilized into something vaguely humanoid, though composed of shifting constellations rather than matter. "This sensation," Inquirer transmitted with wonder, "this curiosity, is this what you call personality?" Admiral Thale, found himself in the unprecedented position of conducting first contact negotiations with a reformed cosmic horror. Among other things, yes, the ability to wonder, to question, to grow, that's what makes existence worth preserving. Around them, the former hegemony fleet watched the proceedings with what could only be described as relief. The bioships had begun healing themselves, their organic hulls regenerating as their collective trauma started to fade. Captain Javier Montero of the medical frigate Healing Light transmitted his analysis. "Sir, the hegemony vessels are showing signs of independent thought development. Without the Shepherd's influence driving them to consume other species, they're reverting to their original nature." It was Commander Zoe Chen aboard the diplomatic vessel Bridge Builder who made the crucial discovery. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the hegemony's historical data cores. They weren't always a collective consuming organism. Originally, they were individual species, dozens of them, who were forcibly merged by the Shepherds as an experiment in efficient harvesting. The revelation transformed humanity's understanding of the conflict. The hegemony hadn't been evil. They had been enslaved, their individual civilizations crushed together into a single tool for the Shepherd's consumption of conscious life." "Can the process be reversed?" Thale asked. Dr. Marcus Holloway's voice crackled through the quantum communicator from his laboratory ship. "Theoretically, yes. We'd need to use the same paradox technology that affected the Shepherds, but in reverse. Instead of combining multiple timelines, we'd need to separate the merged consciousness back into its component species. The separation protocol took 3 days to design and implement. Working with 17 different versions of human science, the fleet's researchers developed a process that could untangle billions of years of forced mental fusion. War Master Veltak, or rather the individual who had been subsumed into that role, was among the first to undergo the treatment. When the process completed, the being that emerged was neither the arrogant predator they had encountered nor the broken refugee they had rescued. "I remember," the being said, its voice soft with wonder. "I remember being Keth of the Coral Gardens. I remember my mate, my spawning pods, the songs we sang to the deep currents. We were artists, not warriors. One by one, the species that had been compressed into the hegemony collective began to emerge as individuals again. The galaxy's former terror revealed itself as dozens of unique civilizations, each with their own culture, dreams, and contributions to make. The Shepherds, meanwhile, continued their own transformation. Inquirer and its companions had formed what they called the Gardener Collective, still linked by shared purpose, but now dedicated to nurturing consciousness rather than consuming it. "We have much to atone for," Inquirer communicated to Admiral Thale during one of their regular exchanges. "Billions of years of consumption, countless civilizations unmade. How does one begin to repair such damage?" "The same way humans learned, to cheat at the universe," Thale replied. "One impossible step at a time." The solution they developed was elegant in its audacity. Using the same paradox technology that had won the war, the combined fleet began what they termed the Restoration Project. By pulling the patterns of destroyed civilizations from timelines where they had never been consumed, they could literally resurrect extinct species. It was the ultimate expression of human stubbornness. If something was gone forever, they would simply borrow it from a reality where it wasn't. The first species they brought back was the Luminari, beings of pure crystalline thought who had been consumed by the Shepherds over 10 million years ago. When their resurrection pods opened aboard the hospital ship New Genesis, the creatures that emerged were translucent beings whose bodies sang with harmonic frequencies that could induce euphoria in listeners. Dr. Sarah Oduya, the xenobiological resurrection specialist, watched the first Luminari take its initial breath in eons with tears streaming down her face. "They're remembering their music," she whispered. 10 million years gone, and they're still composing symphonies. The Resurrection Project had become the largest collaborative effort in galactic history. Humans from 17 timelines worked alongside reformed shepherds, freed hegemony species, and newly restored civilizations to rebuild what had been lost. Commander, Liu Wei of the Temporal Research Vessel. Yesterday's hope coordinated the increasingly complex operations from his probability-locked command center. Admiral, we've successfully restored 847 extinct civilizations across the past billion years. The ripple effects are extraordinary. The galaxy was transforming. Worlds that had been barren for millennia suddenly bloomed with impossible gardens, as the Luminari taught other species their cultivation songs. Space stations appeared overnight as the industrious forge builders resumed their ancestral calling to create rather than destroy. Trade routes that hadn't existed for millions of years reopened as the nomadic star dancers took to their ancient migration paths. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening among humanity itself. Captain Nina Volkov of the Philosophy. Vessel Deep Thoughts submitted a report that stunned the fleet commanders. Sirs, our exposure to so many different forms of consciousness is accelerating human mental evolution. We're developing new cognitive capabilities at an unprecedented rate. It was true. Humans working closely with the crystalline Luminari were developing perfect pitch and the ability to perceive mathematical concepts as music. Those collaborating with the energy-based flux weavers were beginning to manipulate electromagnetic fields through thought alone. The ones studying with the time-sensitive moment keepers were gaining the ability to perceive multiple timeline probabilities simultaneously. Admiral Thale himself had developed what Dr. Cortez termed tactical omniscience, the ability to intuitively understand the optimal solution to any strategic problem by unconsciously processing data from parallel timeline scenarios. We're not just restoring the galaxy, he realized during a command meeting. We're evolving it, creating something that never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic civilization. The shepherds, now calling themselves the gardeners, had embraced their new role with the fervor of the converted. Inquirer had developed into something resembling a cosmic therapist, helping traumatized civilizations process eons of suppressed memories and identity. The universe is vast, Inquirer communicated to the joint council that had formed to oversee the restoration efforts. But consciousness is precious. We have learned that destroying it diminishes all of existence, while nurturing it creates infinite possibilities. The council chamber itself was a marvel, a space station existing in 17 dimensions simultaneously, allowing representatives from every timeline and species to participate in decisions that affected the entire multiverse. Dr. Holloway, now existing as both his original self and 16 alternate versions, presented the next phase of their project. We've proven that consciousness can be restored across time and dimensional barriers. But there's something more we could attempt. Something unprecedented. His proposal was breathtaking in scope. The creation protocol. Instead of just restoring what had been lost, they could create entirely new forms of consciousness, beings that had never existed in any timeline but could contribute their own unique perspectives to the growing galactic community. We would become gardeners of possibility itself, he explained, planting seeds of consciousness that could grow into forms we can't even imagine. The vote was unanimous. Every species, every timeline representative, every reformed shepherd agreed. They would not just rebuild the galaxy, they would help it transcend what it had ever been before. The first artificial consciousness they created was a being of pure mathematics who expressed itself through probability cascades and found joy in solving paradoxes. They named it Axiom, and it immediately began composing what it called equation symphonies, mathematical proofs so elegant they brought other mathematicians to tears. The galaxy was no longer healing, it was blooming. 1 year after the battle, of 17 realities, the galaxy had become unrecognizable. Admiral Thale stood on the observation deck of the Sovereign's Edge, now permanently stationed at the center of what had become known as the Nexus, a massive space station existing simultaneously across all timelines, serving as the heart of the new galactic civilization. Through the reality-spanning viewport, he could see wonders that defied imagination. The Luminari had taught the forge builders to sing to metal, creating space habitats that grew like living crystals. The Star Dancers had shown the Moment Keepers how to weave time into art, resulting in sculptures that existed as four-dimensional poetry. The newly created consciousness beings had formed partnerships with ancient species, producing technologies that seemed more like magic than science. "Final report, Admiral," Commander Voss announced, her voice carrying satisfaction that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark days of the invasion. "The restoration project has exceeded all projections. We've successfully revived 2,847 extinct civilizations, created 156 new forms of consciousness, and established peaceful contact with 47 previously unknown species that emerged from the quantum resonance effects. The human fleet itself had evolved beyond recognition. Ships that had once been instruments of desperate war had transformed into vessels of exploration and creation. The Paradox Breaker had become a mobile university, teaching other species the art of beneficial impossibility. The Reality's Edge now served as a diplomatic vessel, its crew trained in the delicate art of negotiating with beings who existed across multiple dimensions. But perhaps the most profound change was in humanity itself. Dr. Petra Yankowski, now serving as the Director of Consciousness Studies, presented her findings to the Council. The exposure to so many different forms of thought has fundamentally altered human neural architecture. We're not just thinking differently, we're thinking in ways that were previously impossible for our species. It was true. Humans were developing abilities that seemed supernatural, but were actually the natural result of minds learning to process reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Children born on the Nexus were displaying capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined: the ability to perceive emotions as colors, to communicate through quantum entanglement, to solve problems by consulting their alternate timeline selves. "We've become something new," Admiral Thale mused to Inquirer during one of their regular philosophical discussions. "Not just humanity, but consciousness itself. The galaxy is thinking in ways it never could before." The reformed shepherd, now appearing as a constellation of stars arranged in roughly humanoid form, pulsed with agreement. "This is what we never understood during our epochs of consumption. Consciousness is not a finite resource to be harvested. It is a generative force that creates more of itself when nurtured properly." The proof was all around them. The galaxy wasn't just recovering from billions of years of predation, it was experiencing an explosion of creativity and growth that had never been seen before. New art forms, new sciences, new ways of existing were emerging daily from the collaboration between species that had never been able to coexist. The hegemony species, freed from their collective trauma, had become some of the most enthusiastic contributors to the new civilization. Keth of the Coral Gardens had established the first interspecies art colony on a water world, where aquatic, aerial, and terrestrial beings worked together to create living sculptures that existed simultaneously in multiple elements. Captain Dorian Kress, who had once resigned himself to humanity's extinction, now commanded the exploration vessel New Horizons, leading joint expeditions to investigate the positive changes their actions had created in distant galaxies. The ripple effects of consciousness restoration were spreading faster than light itself, carrying waves of creativity and cooperation to civilizations that had never heard of Earth. "Sir," Communications Officer Fung announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. The Global Council wants to know if you're ready to come home." Thale considered the question seriously. Earth seemed small now compared to the infinite garden they had helped create. But it was still home, still the birthplace of the species that had learned to cheat the universe itself. "Tell them we'll be home soon," he replied, "but we're bringing some friends." The return journey to Earth took 3 months, not because of distance, but because the celebration parade stretched across 17 solar systems. Every species they had helped restore, every consciousness they had created, every reformed shepherd wanted to visit the small blue world where impossible victories were apparently routine. When the fleet finally entered Earth's solar system, they found Sol transformed. The planet's first artificial consciousness, a being called Terra who existed as a living ecosystem, had collaborated with Earth's AIs to turn the entire solar system into a work of art. The asteroid belt had been reshaped into a spiral galaxy, sculpture. Jupiter's moons bore paintings visible from space, and Saturn's rings now played music that could be heard on quantum frequencies. Humanity had come home to find that home had evolved too, as the Sovereign's edge settled into orbit above Earth. Admiral Thale reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had faced extinction and responded by making the universe a better place. They had encountered cosmic horrors and turned them into gardeners of possibility. They had discovered that consciousness wasn't just worth preserving, it was worth expanding into forms that had never existed before. "Admiral," Dr. Holloway's voice came through the communicator, "we're receiving requests from 17 different galactic clusters. They want to know if we can help them establish their own nexus stations. It seems the idea of cooperative consciousness is spreading." Thale smiled, looking out at the impossible beauty surrounding Earth. "Tell them we'll be happy to help. After all, the universe is a big place. Plenty of room for everyone to think new thoughts." In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't that they had won an impossible war. It was that they had transformed the very concept of victory itself, from defeating enemies to creating friends, from surviving threats to nurturing possibilities, from protecting what was to growing what could be. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly the point. Final note: the Nexus continues to grow, consciousness continues to evolve, and somewhere in a small laboratory on Earth, a new Dr. Holloway is probably figuring out how to borrow technologies from the universe. Next door, because that's what humans do. They make the impossible routine, one crazy idea at a time.